The quiet hum of the space station was almost hypnotic as it orbited the distant exotic planet. This was Rimiki's homeworld, a place of stunning natural beauty, where lush green landscapes met sparkling blue oceans and towering mountains stood guard against the horizon. Frairen, a seasoned human space explorer, had spent many months here, working alongside his partner, Rimiki. Their bond was unusual, a human and an alien from an ancient and peaceful species, united not by war, but by a common purpose. Today, the station buzzed with the typical calm of routine. Frairen had grown fond of Rimiki's world, appreciating its tranquility and the unique peace it offered. The long stretches of quiet had become a welcome break from the constant chaos of the cosmos. Rimiki, on the other hand, seemed to find solace in Frairen's steady presence. Despite being of a species that had lived for centuries, Rimiki found something grounding in the human's adventurous spirit, a balance to his own measured, thoughtful ways. Together, they had been sent on a diplomatic mission, negotiating peaceful terms between rival alien factions who had, until now, been too stubborn to see eye to eye. The work was slow, methodical, but it had brought hope to the divided galaxy, a new era of cooperation possibly on the horizon. Everything felt in place. But the calm, it seemed, was only the surface. Deep beneath the peace, something was stirring. As Frairen sat in the control room, staring out at the swirling beauty of Rimiki's home, a sudden alarm shattered the stillness. It was faint at first, like a distant rumble, but quickly grew into a full-throated wail of warning. The station's security system flared to life, casting erratic lights across the room. Frairen's hand moved instinctively to the console. Rimiki, who had been in deep conversation with a diplomat from another species, rushed over. The screen flashed with a strange, unfamiliar readout. At first glance, it didn't make sense. Frairen leaned in closer, eyes narrowing. "What is it?" Rimiki asked, his voice a blend of curiosity and growing concern. Frairen's fingers hovered over the controls. The display showed a significant disturbance in the fabric of space itself, something that was, simply put, impossible. A breach had appeared, not on the station, but somewhere in the vast expanse of the planet's orbit. It wasn't a storm, or a meteor. It was something far more dangerous. The data scrolled across the screen, each line revealing something even more unsettling than the last. The breach was moving, cutting through dimensions themselves, tearing a rift in the very fabric of reality. "It's not just a spatial anomaly," Frairen muttered under his breath. "It's like someone slicing through the space-time continuum." Rimiki studied the readings, his eyes narrowing with ancient knowledge. "This is not natural. This shouldn't be possible." The atmosphere around them thickened with unease. The rift was growing wider, and its movement was now heading directly for Rimiki's homeworld. Frairen could feel his heart rate pick up. Whatever was coming through that breach wasn't meant for peaceful negotiation or diplomatic talks. It was something much more dangerous. The screen flickered again, showing more precise coordinates. The tear in space was massive, and it was rapidly getting closer. Rimiki stepped back, a rare flicker of concern crossing his normally composed face. "We have to warn the planet," he said, his voice cool but with an edge of urgency. Frairen's mind raced. The idea of something tearing through space itself, something that could be powerful enough to disrupt entire systems, was a new kind of danger. His gut twisted with the realization that the serenity of Rimiki's world might be coming to an end, and it might be far beyond anyone's ability to stop. As the two of them watched the breach unfold, the first signs of the unknown entity within began to emerge. A distortion in the rift's edges, flickers of shapes that couldn't be fully understood, but they were unmistakable. Something was coming. But what? And what kind of power did it hold? Every moment that passed felt like a countdown, and Frairen felt a cold shiver run through him. The breach had opened, and whatever was on the other side was heading straight for Rimiki's planet. The breach in space-time continued to grow, its jagged edges flickering like the jagged rips of a fabric stretched too thin. Frairen and Rimiki watched in stunned silence as the rift pulsed with waves of energy, sending ripples across the atmosphere of Rimiki's homeworld. The once calm skies above the planet were now filled with chaotic bursts of light, as if the very air itself was being torn apart. The space station suspended above the planet began to groan under the strain. Frairen felt the floor shudder beneath his boots. The lights flickered and dimmed, and the control panels in front of him sparked with erratic power surges. Screens turned to static, systems froze, and alarms echoed through the halls of the station. It was as if every technological device aboard was fighting to stay operational against the disturbance. "This is getting worse," Frairen muttered, trying to regain control of the console, his fingers racing over the malfunctioning panels. Rimiki stood by his side, his alien eyes reflecting a deep, ancient concern. The once tranquil planet below was now bathed in unnatural light, and the disturbances were intensifying with every passing second. "We have to understand what's causing this," Rimiki said, his voice strained. "This breach, it's not just a random anomaly. It's something far more dangerous." Frairen nodded, feeling a cold weight settle in his chest. He had seen many strange things in his travels, but nothing like this. It wasn't a simple rift. It was a tear that seemed to bleed through dimensions themselves. He turned his gaze to Rimiki. "Can your species tell me anything about this?" he asked. Rimiki's face was grim, the peaceful calm that usually defined him replaced with a solemn focus. "There are records in our ancient archives," he said, his voice low, "of a similar event long ago. It was called the Great Tear. It was believed to be the result of an ancient species trying to manipulate the space between dimensions. The consequences were catastrophic. Worlds were consumed, species vanished, and entire star systems were torn apart." Frairen absorbed this new information, his mind working quickly. If this was truly the same phenomenon, the consequences could be far beyond what they had imagined. "We need to stabilize it," he said, his voice sharp. "At least long enough to figure out what's happening." With Rimiki's knowledge of ancient technology and Frairen's knack for quick, practical thinking, the two of them scrambled to devise a plan. Working together, they pieced together a temporary fix. Rimiki used his people's advanced understanding of energy fields, while Frairen applied his human ingenuity and familiarity with the station's equipment. They had to act fast. Every moment the rift was open, it grew stronger, and the effects on the planet were worsening. Finally, after hours of tense work, they managed to stabilize the breach. At least for now. The rift flickered, its pulsating, light dimming slightly, and the energy waves settled into a more predictable pattern. It wasn't much, but it bought them the precious time they needed to investigate further. Frairen let out a relieved sigh. "We've got some time," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "But not much." Rimiki, however, didn't seem to share the same sense of relief. He stared at the rift, his expression distant. "This isn't just an accident," he said quietly. "Whatever caused this, they knew exactly what they were doing." Just as they began preparing to venture closer to the heart of the breach, the station's sensors suddenly went haywire again. A new signal blared on the monitors, alien ships appearing out of nowhere, emerging from the very tear in space itself. Frairen's stomach twisted with unease. The ships were unlike anything he had ever seen. They were sleek, dark, and menacing, their designs sharp and angular, their presence radiating a cold, ruthless energy. The ships began to form a loose formation, each one growing closer, as if drawn to the station, or perhaps to the planet below. Frairen and Rimiki exchanged a grim look. There was no diplomacy in these ships, no message of peace, no attempt at communication. The ships were here for one reason: They had come through the breach, and they were not interested in negotiation. The first salvo of energy from the alien vessels struck the station's outer hull with a deafening roar, sending shockwaves through the structure. Frairen's heart raced as the station shuddered violently. They were under attack. The enemy had arrived, and their intentions were clear. There was no time to waste. The calm they had once known was gone, replaced by the urgency of survival. The rift had not only opened a doorway to another dimension, but it had brought with it an invasion. And now, it was up to Frairen and Rimiki to stop whatever was coming next. The space station trembled as the first wave of alien fire struck its hull, sending sparks and jagged pieces of metal flying through the corridors. Frairen's heart raced, and Rimiki's usual calm demeanor was replaced by a sharp, focused determination. The invaders, emerging from the breach, were nothing like they had ever encountered. Their ships were sleek and menacing, each one bristling with advanced weaponry. But it wasn't their technology that made them so terrifying. It was their tactics. These invaders operated with a cold, calculating efficiency, attacking without warning, without hesitation. Every move they made was ruthless, as though they viewed every other life form as beneath them. The invaders seemed to believe that the universe had room for only one species, theirs. As the station's defenders scrambled to organize a counterattack, Frairen and Rimiki found themselves thrust into the heart of the chaos. Frairen, though a human, had learned quickly in his years of space exploration how to think on his feet. While Rimiki worked alongside the station's security officers to help coordinate the defense, Frairen dashed to the communications console. His mind raced with possibilities. There had to be a way to understand their enemy, to turn the tide. After a few tense moments of frenzied activity, Frairen's fingers flew over the console's interface, bypassing encryption and hacking into the invaders' communications network. The alien language that filled the speakers was harsh and guttural, but Frairen was quick to decipher the message. The invaders weren't just here for conquest. They had come with a singular purpose. They intended to enslave or eliminate all sentient species they encountered. They considered themselves the apex of existence, and every species they met was either a tool to be controlled or an obstacle to be destroyed. The realization hit Frairen like a cold blast of air. The invaders didn't want just Rimiki's planet. They wanted everything. As Rimiki joined him at the console, Frairen relayed the chilling information. "They're here to wipe out everyone," Frairen said, his voice low but intense. "And they're not going to stop until they've taken over every world they can find." Rimiki's expression darkened as he absorbed the news. His species had long prided themselves on peace and understanding, but now they were facing a force that would tolerate no such things. They were dealing with an enemy that knew no mercy. The station's defense systems, though powerful, were no match for the invaders' superior firepower. One by one, their ships broke through the station's outer defenses, raining down explosions that lit up the surrounding space. The station rocked with every impact, its power flickering as its systems struggled to keep up with the relentless assault. Despite the overwhelming odds, Frairen and Rimiki fought with everything they had. Frairen organized the defenders using his quick thinking to set traps and mislead the invaders, buying them precious time. But the longer the battle raged, the clearer it became that they were fighting a losing war. Then, just as the defenders began to regroup for a counterattack, a new terror emerged from the invaders' ships. A massive, pulsating energy cannon was deployed, aimed directly at Rimiki's world below. Frairen's blood ran cold as he realized the true intent behind the weapon. It wasn't just a tool for destroying ships. It was a device capable of draining the life force from an entire planet. The readings on the station's monitor confirmed it. The invaders planned to use the weapon to strip Rimiki's world of its energy, leaving it a barren, lifeless husk. "No!" Rimiki shouted, his voice filled with a desperate urgency. "We can't let them do this!" The weapon was already charging, its massive form drawing in energy from the breach itself. Rimiki's homeworld was the target, and there was no time to waste. The two of them exchanged a glance, both knowing that their next move would be the most critical of their lives. If they didn't act now, it could be too late. The invaders were determined to wipe out everything, to bend the galaxy to their will. Frairen and Rimiki had only one choice: strike back with everything they had, or watch as the universe was changed forever. The countdown to the weapon's activation continued, the ticking of time echoing like a ticking bomb. Their plan had to be executed swiftly, or the destruction of Rimiki's world would be just the beginning of the invaders' campaign to enslave the entire sector. Frairen paced in the dimly lit control room, his mind racing through a dozen potential plans. The countdown was ticking, the energy cannon was charging, and Rimiki's homeworld was in immediate danger. The life-draining weapon was only moments from activation, and their only hope rested on a daring, risky move, one that had no guarantees. Frairen knew this could be his only chance to prevent the planet's destruction, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. "I'll board their flagship," Frairen said, turning to Rimiki. "I can disable the weapon from the inside." Rimiki's expression tightened with concern, but there was a flicker of trust in his eyes. He knew Frairen was capable of incredible feats under pressure. "It's too dangerous," Rimiki warned, but he didn't try to stop him. They both understood the stakes. "We don't have time for anything else," Frairen replied. "I'm the only one who can move quickly enough. If I wait for backup, it'll be too late." With that, Frairen prepared for his mission, knowing that stealth and ingenuity would be his only allies. Armed with little more than a portable hacking device and his resourcefulness, Frairen boarded one of the smaller ships docked at the station. The plan was simple: infiltrate the invaders' flagship, avoid detection, and sabotage the weapon before it could fire. It was risky, but Frairen was used to taking risks. As his ship drifted toward the massive alien vessel, Frairen activated his cloaking technology. The flagship loomed large ahead, its menacing shape reflecting the dim light from the rift. The ship's exterior was a labyrinth of jagged lines and twisted metal, a design clearly meant to intimidate, but Frairen didn't flinch. He set his course for the rear docking bay, the least patrolled area. Inside the alien ship, the atmosphere was oppressive. The corridors were narrow and dark, the walls pulsating with an eerie energy that made Frairen's skin crawl. He moved, cautiously, relying on his training as an infiltrator. Every step was measured, every sound magnified in the cold silence of the ship. Frairen had been in dangerous situations before, but the sheer size and alien nature of the invaders' ship filled him with a sense of unease. He knew the invaders wouldn't hesitate to destroy anything in their path, and if he was caught, his mission would end in failure. Back at the station, Rimiki was working tirelessly to rally the remaining factions that had yet to choose sides. He wasn't the kind of leader who relied on force. His strength was in diplomacy and persuasion. As Frairen risked his life on the enemy ship, Rimiki worked to forge alliances with the lesser-known factions in the sector. His calm demeanor and persuasive words began to sway even the most neutral groups. Rimiki had an innate understanding of the power of subtle manipulation, using diplomacy to carefully shift the balance of power. He promised protection to the smaller factions in exchange for their cooperation, painting a picture of a united front against the invaders. Each new alliance added to the planetary defenses, strengthening their resistance against the overwhelming force of the enemy. But as Frairen navigated deeper into the heart of the invaders' ship, the darkness around him seemed to grow thicker. The corridors twisted in unnatural ways, and the air felt charged, as though the very ship itself was alive. It was then that Frairen stumbled upon something that stopped him in his tracks. Hidden in a dimly lit chamber, he found a series of crystalline structures, each one glowing faintly. It took him only moments to realize what he was looking at. The invaders' ships were powered by the very life force of destroyed planets. Planets that had been drained of all their energy, leaving them barren and lifeless. The crystals pulsed with a sickly light, each one containing the remnants of a planet's life. Frairen's stomach churned as he understood the full scope of what was happening. The invaders weren't just conquering, they were harvesting entire worlds. And Rimiki's homeworld, the beautiful planet he had come to love, was already marked for destruction. The rift in space wasn't just a doorway, it was the beginning of the end. Frairen's blood ran cold as the realization hit him like a punch, to the gut. There was no time to waste. If the invaders had already begun harvesting Rimiki's planet, they wouldn't stop until it was completely drained. With this discovery in mind, Frairen knew the urgency of his mission had just escalated. He had to stop the weapon, but now he had to do more. He had to stop the entire invasion before it was too late. The countdown to destruction continued, but Frairen now understood the stakes. The survival of countless planets, including Rimiki's world, hung in the balance. Frairen moved quietly through the dark, winding corridors of the enemy flagship, his every sense heightened, each step a careful calculation. The deeper he ventured into the heart of the ship, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. There was an eerie, pulsating energy flowing through the walls, and the air felt thick, almost alive. As he passed by one of the ship's central chambers, Frairen's gaze caught on something that made his blood run cold. He stopped, peering through a crack in the door. Inside was a massive central structure, an organic, pulsing core that seemed to be the very heart of the invader's ship. Around it were hundreds of humanoid figures, shackled and suspended in tanks, their bodies hooked to strange machines that drained their life force, feeding it into the ship's energy systems. Frairen's heart raced as he realized the truth. The invaders were not just warlords, conquerors seeking dominion over the stars. They were a hive-mind species, a collective consciousness that absorbed the life force of other species to power. Their empire. The invaders didn't just conquer planets. They enslaved entire populations, using their life energy to fuel their dark, twisted technology. And among the captives, Frairen saw faces he recognized. Humans. He could barely breathe. As the weight of the situation settled over him, these were his people, taken in previous conquests, now nothing more than batteries for a parasitic empire. A deep moral dilemma gnawed at him. His original mission had been clear: disable the life-draining weapon, stop the destruction of Rimiki's world. But now, staring at the enslaved humans, he knew there was more at stake. He could disable the weapon, but could he leave these people to suffer, to be drained of their very essence? The choice was not an easy one, but Frairen knew that. To stop the invaders completely, he needed to free them. The decision came with a heavy cost. Time was running out. The life-draining weapon was mere moments away from firing, but if Frairen acted, he could not guarantee that he would succeed. With a sigh of resolve, Frairen activated his comm device. "Rimiki," he said, his voice low. "I've found humans. Lots of them. They're powering the invaders' technology. I can stop the weapon, but if I free them, we risk everything." There was a pause on the other end, and Frairen could almost hear Rimiki's thoughtful expression through the silence. Finally, Rimiki's calm voice spoke. "Frairen, if we only stop the weapon, we'll be saving one world. But if you free the humans, you're giving them a chance to stop this nightmare. Not just for us, but for everyone. I know it's dangerous, but you have to try." The weight of Rimiki's words settled over Frairen like a heavy cloak. He could feel the pull of the planet below, Rimiki's homeworld, which was hanging on, the edge of annihilation. Yet, the opportunity to save countless others, to free those who had already suffered, was too great to ignore. With a deep breath, Frairen made his choice. He moved swiftly through the shadows, using his hacking device to override the security systems and release the prisoners from their restraints. As he worked, he quietly whispered words of reassurance to the terrified humans, urging them to stay calm and follow his lead. One by one, the captives began to stir, groggy at first, but then realizing the freedom that had been offered to them. Frairen knew the clock was ticking. They had no time to waste. The prisoners, though weak and disoriented, followed his instructions. Together, they sabotaged key systems within the flagship, tearing apart the core that powered the invaders. Hive mind control. The invaders, realizing something was wrong, began to scramble. Alarms blared, but the damage had been done. The collective control of the hive mind began to fracture as the humans regained some semblance of their will. It wasn't a perfect victory, but it was enough to give Frairen a chance. As they began to make their way back toward the ship's escape pods, Frairen's communicator crackled again. "Frairen," Rimiki's voice echoed, full of urgency. "The weapon is about to fire. You need to hurry. There's no time left." Frairen's stomach twisted. He knew the weapon was moments away from being activated. The countdown was happening as they spoke. With a final push, he and the prisoners reached the escape pods, launching themselves into the void of space just as the invaders' ship shuddered under the strain of its failing systems. But as Frairen watched from the safety of the pod, a terrible realization struck. The weapon was still charging, still aimed directly at Rimiki's world. The countdown was nearing its end. They had made their escape, but Rimiki's planet was still in the crosshairs. The race against time had just become even more desperate. As the dark, swirling void of space stretched out before him, Frairen gritted his teeth. It wasn't over yet. The weapon was about to fire. And if he couldn't? Stop it now. Everything they had fought for would be lost. The atmosphere of Rimiki's world was in chaos. The once serene skies were now filled with swirling clouds of energy, the planet's core trembling as the life-draining weapon began to siphon its very essence. Every second that passed brought them closer to the complete destruction of Rimiki's home. On the surface, Rimiki stood at the heart of the planetary defense operations, his calm demeanor masking the storm of thoughts racing through his mind. His people, though peaceful by nature, had fought for survival before, and now they would do so again. He rallied his forces, calling upon the courage of those who had once been neutral, convincing them that their survival was not just for Rimiki's world, but for all worlds threatened by the invaders. The planet was under siege, but Rimiki's leadership brought a glimmer of hope. Above, the sky was alive with fire as the invader fleet swelled, their reinforcements pouring through. The breach, their dark ships closing in like vultures around a dying prey. The invaders had sensed the fracture in their hive mind, but it had not slowed them down. Instead, they pressed forward, their numbers increasing as they prepared to strike the final blow. Frairen knew the time for action was now. He had barely escaped the invaders' flagship, and with him, a small group of freed human prisoners and Rimiki's most trusted allies. Together, they would make their way to the breach itself, the epicenter of the entire conflict. But even as they made their way toward the heart of the rift, Frairen could feel the weight of what they were about to face. The invaders weren't just a threat to Rimiki's planet anymore. They were a threat to every world, every species in the sector. The breach wasn't just a weapon, it was a doorway, and the invaders had been preparing for something much larger. The final stand was inevitable. As Frairen and his team raced toward the breach, the space around them erupted in a massive battle. Rimiki's forces were engaged in a brutal defense, their ships darting across the battlefield, engaging the invaders in an all-out war for survival. The rebel humans fought valiantly, determined to defend the world that had given them a chance at freedom. Frairen's heart raced as he watched the destruction unfold in space. The sight of so many lives being risked, so many ships being destroyed, made every second feel like an eternity. The weight of the mission was crushing. They couldn't afford failure, not with so much at stake. The path through the breach was chaotic, the very air crackling with unnatural energy. Frairen and his team pressed forward, knowing that they were on the brink of something far larger than any battle they had fought before. They had to sever the connection between the invaders and the dimension itself. If they didn't, the rift would remain open, drawing more and more reinforcements, and eventually pulling every world into a war that had been brewing for centuries. As they approached the epicenter of the breach, Frairen's mind raced. The closer they got, the stronger the pull of the rift became, the air around them warping with each step. There, in the heart of the breach, Frairen finally faced the horrifying truth. The invaders weren't just seeking to conquer and destroy. They were part of a much larger conflict, one that was about to spill over into every corner of the galaxy. The breach wasn't just a portal to their world. It was a link to an endless war, a war they had been preparing for, using the destruction of countless worlds to fuel their fight. Frairen's heart skipped a beat as he realized the true scale of what they were facing. If they didn't close the breach now, if they didn't sever the link, the galaxy itself would be dragged into a war that would tear everything apart. The very fabric of space-time was at risk of unraveling, and the stakes had never been higher. There was no turning back now. Frairen and his team had no choice but to continue their mission, to fight until the very end, knowing that the fate of every world in the sector hung in the balance. But time was running out, and the invaders' relentless push forward was only getting stronger. The countdown to destruction was almost complete, and the breach was growing more unstable by the minute. If Frairen didn't act now, they would lose everything. The final stand had begun, and the cost of victory might be more than they were ready to pay. The final battle was nothing short of chaos. The skies above Rimiki's world were ablaze with the lights of exploding ships, the sound of energy blasts and the roar of war shaking the very foundations of the planet. But amid the turmoil, a glimmer of hope flickered. Frairen, Rimiki, and their allies had made it to the heart of the breach, where the ancient alien artifact was hidden, an artifact that, if activated correctly, could sever the link between the invaders' dimension and their own. Time was running out. The invader fleet had been pushed to the brink, but they were not giving up without one last push. Frairen gripped the artifact, its surface pulsating with energy, and with Rimiki at his side, they activated it. The artifact hummed with a deep, ancient power, its light spreading across the rift like a wave, reaching into the very fabric of space-time. The air around them crackled as the artifact's power surged through the breach, severing the connection between the invaders and their dimension. The invader fleet, already weakened from their failed assault on Rimiki's world, began to lose power. Their ships faltered, and many began to drift aimlessly in space, their weapons deactivated. The force that had once driven them forward was gone, and the invasion faltered. The breach, once a jagged tear in space, began to heal, the edges closing in on themselves, like a wound being stitched back together. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was silence, a deep, resonant quiet as the invading forces retreated back into the breach, their final, desperate attempts at conquest failing. Rimiki's world had been saved. The life-draining weapon was deactivated and the invaders' fleet was in disarray. But while the immediate threat had been vanquished, the cost of this victory had been high. Rimiki looked out over the battlefield, watching the remnants of the invader fleet as it slipped back into the rift. The planet was safe for now, but the damage had been done. Cities lay in ruin, and many lives had been lost. The survivors would have to rebuild. Yet, even as the immediate battle ended, a deeper understanding settled over Frairen and Rimiki. The galaxy was no longer the same. The breach had opened their eyes to the true nature of the invaders, and the fact that their war was far from over. The galaxy had been forced to confront the reality that there was a much larger war brewing, one that stretched beyond their world and beyond their galaxy. As the invaders retreated into their dimension, Frairen and Rimiki knew that the peaceful alliance they had worked so hard to build would need to be stronger than ever. Humanity, Rimiki's species, and the other galactic civilizations were now united. bound together by the shared threat that loomed just beyond the rift. It wasn't just Rimiki's world that was in danger now, it was every world in the galaxy, and they were all connected by the same tenuous thread of survival. As Frairen and Rimiki stood together, watching the rift close, they knew this was only the beginning. They would have to prepare for the future, a future where the true enemy had not been defeated, only momentarily repelled. The invaders' retreat was not a victory. It was a temporary pause. The greater threat still loomed, a shadow from their dimension stirring, a force far more powerful than anything they had yet encountered. The rift, though sealed for now, had only been a small part of a much larger conflict. Frairen's thoughts raced as he realized the full weight of the situation. The true war was yet to come, and humanity, for all its struggles and achievements, might play a pivotal role in the outcome. As the remnants of the invader fleet disappeared into the breach, Frairen and Rimiki exchanged a look, one of quiet resolve. The future would be uncertain, and the path ahead would be fraught with dangers. But they were not alone. Together, they would stand against the storm that was sure to come.